Let's go back to, like, say, the end of 2019 and the first of 2020. We were seeing these images coming out of China. Okay, so there were protests in Hong Kong. My first inclination was to think, here, they've got to shut these protests down because these were pro-democracy, if you will, for lack of better terms, pro-democracy Hong Kong protests, and they had to shut that down. And I thought, well, COVID is just a way of shutting that down. They're getting people back in their homes, and effectively it did, in essence. But then you start to see the images of people collapsing on the street and welding people in their homes. And we thought, this is crazy. And if everybody was saying, well, if it's coming here, we'll handle this differently. But we didn't really handle it any differently. And I can remember seeing footage from drones in China where a guy's walking down the street in a village. And the drone starts talking to him, saying, what are you doing out here in the street? You need to get back in. You're not wearing a mask. You need to go back home. And the guy's kind of chuckling, and he's laughing, and he goes back in. But now we're seeing a full-blown realization of this, right? I mean, we saw the video and the images from Shanghai. Right. People screaming. You can hear them, as they're overlooking this economic center, which is of China, Shanghai, and these people are screaming. And what's going on in that situation?
Well, think about the absurdity of this in the American context. The Chinese government has mandated that people in Shanghai are, the euphemism is sheltering in place. Yeah. But they're not sheltering in place. They're locked in their apartments. And why would they've been locked in their apartments for long enough that the food has run out and they're starting to starve, and they're starting to go to they're not allowed to go to their windows and scream, but what they're screaming is, I'd rather die than do this. Yeah. But why would they do that? Why would you comply with that? It's because if they break the rules, if they go out into the streets, they will be identified and they will be labeled bad citizens, and they might be beaten, but more importantly, their lives are ruined, because once you become a bad citizen in China, they debank you. They take away your bank account, they take away your means of getting a job, and then they start targeting your family. So they're making this choice. Do I starve to death, or do I suffer a lifetime of destruction? Yeah. And it's so anti-human. It's hard for Americans, I think, to imagine that such a thing. But the entire infrastructure that they use to keep the Chinese people submissive is exactly the things that we've done to Americans over the last 2 years.
I want to jump off onto another point, but I want to save that for a second, because that's going to take us down a whole other rabbit hole in talking about how they're going to control us financially and various other ways. You mentioned the Great Reset. We'll talk about that. This idea, and again, they were playing the clip of the screaming from their apartments and from their homes there in Shanghai while you were talking, which is a very eerie way to listen to Matt Kibbe with Chinese, with Mandarin screams in the background. But I've seen videos of people literally throwing themselves out of their windows to their death. They just don't want to deal with this anymore. And we talk about them welding people in their homes. I don't know that they ever unwelded them. You know, they left them in there. They're not feeding these people. They're stuck. And you say, this could never happen in America. This would never happen in America. But look at what we've done in the last 2 years. You know, Steve Day sent me a message a few weeks ago, and he goes, that's why they don't go after the guns anymore. They don't have to. They've realized we're not going to use them. We're not going to fight back. We're willing to bow to the tyranny of whatever they tell us to do in the name of safety. I've said it's a religion from the very beginning of safetyism. The talisman was a mask. Now it's the vaccine. Do you have it? How many boosts have you had? It's kind of scary. But they can do it here, which again leads us back to this whole idea of the Great Reset, which means what? Yeah.
And by the way, not having access to food in China, just beyond the obvious reasons of you need food to live, older Chinese remember Mao's Great Leap Forward, and they remember almost starving to death, and millions of people did starve to death because of that experiment in authoritarianism. So the worst thing you can do to a person in China is make them feel like they don't have access to food. And so, but remember, the Great Reset is Klaus Schwab's sort of Dr. Evil lair, where he and a lot of really bad people come up it's a think tank supposedly,
right.
and it's a very elite think tank. It's held in Davos, and everybody gathers there. But it's all government elites and corporate elites that gather there. They've been talking for the longest time about all these systems of control, because their vision is they hate the idea that people would be free to make up their own minds. They think it's chaotic. They think it's messy. They probably think it's morally repugnant that we would get to choose for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So they're always planning these top-down systems.